Prosecutors in Nantucket have dropped charges of indecent assault and battery in the groping case against actor Kevin Spacey, who, in a statement, said, "Now I told you not to worry. I've been accused of a lot of things, but I have always been triumphant in proving that the truth is on my side. Now, you might not see me for a while, but don't worry, I'll be back." In a series of tweets, President Trump told Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley to go back to their home countries. "Look, I'm not friends with the guy. I barely know him. I have not hung out with him in years," said Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, jeez.
Because that's... And finally, Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania told Vice News that he isn't offended by President Trump's comments about 4 Democratic congresswomen of color because he's a person of color. Now, in a little bit, we'll show you a picture of Representative Mike Kelly. But you take a look, and he's very white. So the only color he really should be is red. But if you look really closely, you're going to see some really odd coloring that's probably the result of having his head up President Trump's ass. Hey, the Trump Report starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Yes, it's a special day and a special time. It is a special Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt, joined by Chelsea Galicia.
Hello there.
And Scott Moore, the S-Man.
Yes, hey guys.
I appreciate everybody joining us at an odd time. Now, obviously, being a podcast, you have people subscribe. They might not know when we did this live, but there are people who are in the live chat.
And we love those
We
people.
love those
we
people.
do.
We scheduled this because of all the great Mueller testimony that we got yesterday or earlier today, right? And of course, that didn't happen. Allegedly, we're going to get it next Wednesday, so we'll also be on at the same time next Wednesday, 5 Pacific. No, 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern. I was so quick with the math that I did it wrong. So, and then the week after that is going to be the debate. So you're not going to see us on our regular night/afternoon for a couple
Until August.
That's right. And you know, look, and in August, the presidential election will only be 15 months away. So we're going to be so much closer to it at that point. Anyway, obviously a lot to talk about as always, and I did want to start in an obvious place, which is first President Trump's tweets. And I know when Tamara's usually here, she doesn't think we should pay much attention to his tweets. But the world kind of really pays attention to tweets when they come directly from the President of the United States. So what I wanted to do to start is read the 3 tweets because I had really just seen the middle one highlighted. It doesn't help. I'm going to give you a spoiler right there. But as we talk about it, I thought I should read all 3 of them. So this comes from President Trump. I think you know where he is on Twitter, but if not, good for you. So he writes, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept anywhere in the world, parentheses, even if they even have a functioning government at all, now loudly," on to the second tweet, "and viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how it is done. These places need your help badly. You can't leave fast enough. I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi would be very happy to quickly work out free travel arrangements." So there's a lot wrong with this. 3 of the 4 women in question, who I did mention at the top of the show, are all U.S.-born citizens. Specifically, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the corrupt government that she would need to go back to is the government of the city of New York. One that I think Donald Trump probably was able to circumvent some regulations during his time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I believe there's been some influence in there. Rudy is one of his best friends, clearly. I'm not alleging anything except for what I'm alleging. So... obviously, and look, she had a good line about it. She was just, so first of all, her ethnicity is Puerto Rican. So even if you were saying she should go back to Puerto Rico, that's also, and he's shown before that he doesn't know that that's part of the United States. And in case anybody in the chat mentions, yes, I know President Obama once misspoke and said there were 57 states. Right? I find that funny too, by the way. I find that very funny that anyone running for president would say 57 states. I don't think it's a consistent problem, but it's still funny. So
at least he added more. You know, he wasn't taking them away.
What if he's like 47 states? I'm like, wait, which ones did he get rid of? Who's he planning to sell? So there are differing reactions to this, including one that I read just a short time ago. But first, President Trump said he wouldn't apologize for these tweets because a lot of people agree with him. And his son, Don Jr., doubled down and said about 95% of people agree with him. I think that's a fairly high number on something that, you know, even if you're right, you probably don't say it out loud. So there are, of course, other reactions in the Congress and all that. But we always talk about on the show how hard it is to be surprised by something that, and I was going to say comes out of the mouth of the president, but I guess it comes out of his fingers. But, you know, that's how he speaks. And
those little tiny fingers.
That's right.
Those tapping away on that.
Those minuscule baby hands that he has, you know, typing away. Yeah. And so obviously we like to say that we can't be surprised, but I'm going to say this was surprising that the level, you know, that's what it was. And we'll talk sort of about the politics behind this, but I just want to start with instant reactions. And Chelsea, when you heard that he said something along these lines, did you think, well, I need to see it because he wouldn't have possibly said for them to go back to the country they came from when they all, except for one, came from this country, right?
No. I was not surprised at all. In fact, when Trump was elected, I think the very first conversation that I had with my mom after that, my mom who was born in Mexico and who is a United States citizen, I asked her, are you afraid of what people are going to say, things like, go back to where you're from? Because I've been around where people have said that to her. And, you know, my mom works to be enlightened, is like, no, that's, you know, their problem, and it doesn't bother me. She's, I guess, over nearly 60 years of life, grown a thick skin, and it doesn't bother her. But it does bother a lot of people. It does hurt a lot of people, as is understandable. Our reaction to be surprised by it, I guess, is futile. We should, I believe, speak out against it, and at the same time highlight ways that we're going to address this sort of, it's like systemic racism when it's being spoken by the leader at the top. So I just wish that in the discussions about this, we would be speaking more about the policies that illustrate that this is not just a phrase that's said, but that it's actually become as part of how we govern, redlining and things like that. So I just wish that the conversation brought in a little bit more policy and like what's been proposed. And, you know, I understand that Democrats are not in charge, and so they can't really control what's being brought up to vote on, at least not in the Senate. And it's kind of futile to go through that whole exercise in the House when you know it's just going to be ignored in the Senate. So it's an opportunity to talk about the history of racism, how it's not really past, it's still ongoing, and how we need to address it. I think when we have things like, you know, Eric Garner's, the officer who, I guess I can say killed him, you know, there's not going to be any federal charges. All those kinds of things just get the sense that we're not really doing anything or caring very much about people of color in this country. And so I think this, let's not just get caught up in the hysteria of, can you believe he said that? Yes, he said it. We address it. We condemn it. And then we also talk about policies that we need to implement to help address this kind of problem that is spewing out of the president's mouth and showing up in everyday Americans' lives.
Scott, I've been saying for years that you should go back to where you came from, which is Florida, but you haven't listened yet. So here you are, which I appreciate. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. But you're sort of same question to you. So when do you see these tweets, or do you just sort of hear reporting of like, wait, he said what, or how do you first find out that that this is what's out there?
I usually check. I don't follow him, but
Right.
I'm always like, what kind of disaster is happening this morning? And always the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is he really distracting from? Is the first thing. When these came out, I thought, okay, well, lead by example. Send your wife back to Slovenia. So if you're going to talk about, saying these are not racist, but yet you have a wife who came from another country, it's just downright embarrassing, I think, for not only us as a country, but what does the rest of the world look at us now that you talk about us being the best country in the world and everything, but yet you say such ridiculous, stupid things. And I don't know if there was a distraction there from something bigger that he's trying to, bury under the rug, or if this is some tactic where, again, he thinks this continuing dividing of everyone will gin up the support of his cult of 20% of people that are going to go out and vote for him, and he somehow thinks that this is going to continue to be a winning strategy for him. But I think that the more that he does things like this, the more that he's going to be mistaken, because he won by such a fluke in Electoral College. It's not going to take a lot of people that are like even sane Republicans that are going to be fed up with this type of crap in the way that we're being represented, not only in our country but the rest of the world. And the only thing I would say to you, Chelsea, is even though I agree that the House won't be able to do much, I think it's important for them to vote on things and to bring it up, so when it comes to election time, to say, look, if we had a unified Democratic Senate, even beyond the president, that we could make some real systemic changes, and these are the things that we have voted on that have been thwarted by the Republican Senate. So I think it is important, like, for instance, today, I think they are actually going to be doing impeachment votes later today on just this situation with the tweets, because obviously we're waiting for the Mueller testimony.
I agree. I amend my opinion to conform with Scott's.
I just think it's important that we can come with a track record to say, this is what Democrats have done, and if we can have a unified government with the Senate, we can actually make real changes, and that we should not be putting up with this type of nonsense anymore from someone who's, supposedly being the president. I put the term loosely.
Then here's another concern, and I'd love to hear how you address this. Then the concern becomes, so, white middle Americans are saying, okay, well, this is all great, but how is this helping me? I'm being forgotten again. And so the Democratic Party isn't the right party to represent me. And so then we get hyper-focused on race. So it's like, yes, we need to bring it up and how we're going to address it. And then at the same time, we need to bring up also how doing so is going to help everybody, American,
exactly.
And not just people of color, so that we don't further divide us by race. But I think the equally more dangerous statement that is included in that series of tweets is that if you are upset, if you don't like this country, to imply if you have any grievances, then just leave.
Right.
And I think that's the more like the coalescing phrase or statement in here that is, I think he thinks is going to help him in 2020. Like, listen, if you at this point have any complaints about this country, leave. Doesn't matter if the economy that I helped, I don't know,
keep
provide,
going.
Yeah,
certainly didn't do anything.
It's been really, not helpful to the majority of Americans, because I haven't done anything really meaningful on opioids, because I haven't done anything really meaningful on healthcare. At this point, if you don't like it, leave. I don't know how that is inspired. I mean, I guess, is that just trying to tell Americans you should just like shut up and disengage from the political conversation? Because if you engage in the conversation and any part of you wants to improve something, you're just complaining, and there's the border, you can leave.
Well, that's what I took it as, is that it was more of a, oh, well, everything's so great, so what are you complaining about? And if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. And then ginning up again that support of that, I use the term cult, but basically the 20% or so that will never turn their back on him, to feel a bit more enemy. Like, yes, everything is great, and if you think there's issues here, then go leave and go to a socialist or communist country. It's how I basically worded it, which, again, you are correct. It is dangerous, because we have a right as Americans to be able to have issues with our government and air those grievances freely, and our president and member, and that's a fundamental right. And again, it's more of that dictator type mentality of like, well, if you don't like it, go somewhere else, because it's It's quashing.
That's the conversation that I'm like, I can understand some Republicans are like, oh gosh, I don't want to touch the race thing. I don't want to get trapped in the identity politics thing. But at least they can say it's un-American to suggest that Americans should leave the country if they have any grievances. I am in Congress because I believe that we need to change the direction or improve the direction of where this country is going. And so it is un-American to say you shouldn't have any grievances or complaints or desires to change or improve this country. Right. That would have been an easy thing for them to disagree with and come out against him.
Well, I basically wrote back to him on Twitter just to the group and everything of people that may see it and just saying, this new shtick that he's basically trying out is already tiring and boorish because it's just like another thing to divide people and distract and from the real issues going on. So
well, I think that that it is much more calculated than it seems. Just sort of the moment of like, this is a great time to be racist. And I'm glad you brought up the 20% thing because I think that's you're giving America a lot of credit. We haven't talked a lot about this on the show, but the way I see it right now, this is the gut it's not based on. I think there's about 40% of the people who will not vote for him no matter what, and there's about 40% of the people who it doesn't matter who runs against him will. So I feel like we have this margin of about 10%. I'm just talking about 10% of people who actually vote, not 10% of the population. Right. I'm talking about voters. So there's this fine line with the 10%. And it's very easy to sway you just need 50% plus one vote, really, is all he needs to get. And yes, if they're looking at the electoral map from last time, from 2016, I'm sure that there is a strategy. You can say what you want about him and the people that he hires and, all the scandals they end up, but there are enough of them that can look at a map and figure out where they should campaign and what issues are going to work. And I think what this effectively does is it raises the issue of, look at these 4 women who, when you discount the race just for a moment, they have somewhat radical policies. And it's easy to say, these are the Democratic Party, and Nancy Pelosi hates them. And so you're doing a lot. You're sowing the discontent within the party, but you're also saying like, you don't like these women, and when in the debate, when they asked the question of who would give free health care to illegal immigrants, I understand.
Terrible question. Oh,
terrible
God,
question, but they all raised their hand.
Yeah.
And that's going to be in a campaign ad because it's like, look, all these people want that. And I think if you don't raise your hand and you have a really good answer as to why you didn't, you might not get asked. So I understand being put on the spot like that. But you're starting to see that that's what the narrative is. And you're starting to see why people look that 24 people are running for president, and you think maybe 2 of them have a chance, but depends on the day as to what they've said and what they haven't, and who they've hugged and whose hair they've smelled, as to whether or not you think that they might win. So I think that and look, I was reading an article that white nationalist organizations love these tweets. They're writing about how, see, we told you Trump was our guy, and that's what happens when you don't condemn them. You're just like, hey, look, a lot of people voted for me. What can I say? I don't vouch for everybody, but you don't actually directly say it. So, he's obviously still their guy. I don't know who else would be. So we have Nancy Pelosi. This was yesterday. This wasn't this morning, right? Where she actually condemned the comments. And I think that it's very interesting that we live in an age where you can say to someone that by their language they have disparaged the office of the president and it should be stricken from the record. When I think I don't remember, and one of you speak up if you do. I don't remember a president ever swearing before at a once he's elected, a rally or in a press conference. So I think that the office of the president is not what it once was, and you can point to Bill Clinton if you want to. Sure. Absolutely, you can argue before that, but certainly at that point, there's things that happened literally in the office of the president. So I don't know. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts though on how likely do you think it is? I'll ask you first, Scott. That this is all part of. Not Trump's, but someone's plan of like, now these are the faces that you're seeing. That and don't forget everybody who raised their hands about giving free health care to illegal immigrants.
I'm sure they all meant after every American gets free health care.
And of course, we already know that, again, giving free health care and helping immigrants also strengthens Americans, because if people aren't sick, and people aren't dying, if everyone has access to good health care, that makes us stronger as a community and stronger for working and everything else in the economy. So it's again, people aren't thinking comprehensively enough on what that means. It's not just giving free stuff away. It's basically helping the entire country raise up to a higher level when you're taking care of everybody and getting everybody out to be able to work and have full employment. But that said, yes, I do think, of course, everything, my first thought, like I said earlier, was what is he really distracting from? And then also, like you said, these are very polarizing figures in the Democratic Party in general who have very high unfavorables. So, of course, it's easy to, put them out on a pedestal and bring them up and well, not pedestal, that's the wrong word, because bring them, but highlighting those people because of their high unpopularity for those exact areas in maybe swing states and areas where he barely won that have high white populations. So of course there is a gross tactic behind it, but it's like I said, this next election is going to be the dirtiest we've ever seen. We thought 2016 was bad, but it's going to be a whole other level. So yes, there definitely is a tactic behind it, and because he's been able to get away with it all this time, he continues to be able to do it. Now, I don't know if we're going to get into the whole parliamentary thing that happened with Pelosi
We can talk about that too, sure.
But let's also be honest, that was a political stunt by Republicans because they have no other leverage in the House. So it was a stunt that was used to bring up something, and of course it failed to pass, to be stricken from the record. But again, it wasted time, and now they're having this internal argument between Republicans and Democrats to get away from what was really happening. And it was something that actually came back from the 1800s. It's no longer even used in the Senate. It's used in the House now. And it basically came from the days of Jefferson in a way of being able to, based off of British Parliament. And it was basically saying you can't talk ill of the king or queen. And again, it's silly, and it's an old rule, and it was used politically, and it has been used quite a bit, which we haven't really talked about since 2016. The funny thing is when Republicans had control, they were, condemning Democrats a lot in the House. But I think it was used back with George W. Bush. I forget which congressional person it was, but they had actually called George W. Bush racist at some point, and I'm sure it was back with Katrina or something in that time period, but it hasn't been used that much until now. I believe
they censured Kanye West for saying that he didn't care about black people. Yeah.
So it's kind of a silly rule, and it's been in effect for 180 years at least. But
I love Scott's history lessons.
But it is a very it was a very silly stunt, and I'm glad that it actually didn't get stricken from the record, because I do believe it's important, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, that we should be able to also, as a member in the Congress, as a separation of power, should be able to criticize a president. It had nothing to do with the office. It was condemning the remarks said or tweeted, in this case, by a president. So to me, that's a differentiation than just calling, this current president an asshole or something, which, is very different on the floor than saying, oh, we're condemning his remarks of what he himself wrote or said is a very different, to me, case. So, of course, it was a political stunt. And we have some more interesting votes today that are going to be happening, which will be...
Well, yeah, and there's obviously the movement. It's funny, I haven't seen Al Green's name on TV so much, and then I realized it's not the singer, so it wasn't... I didn't quite know why he was trending. Actually, I believe he passed away. But anyway, he wanted to... Mm-hmm. So the congressman, Al Green, wanted to vote on impeachment, and Nancy Pelosi has, I would say, distanced herself from it. I think... It is always distracting, but I guess if you feel like it's important enough, let me ask you very directly, Chelsea, is it worth taking this vote, even though it is completely for show, that you're going to, vote for impeachment over what apparently only 5% of the population consider to be racist? That's according to Donald Trump Jr. In case you missed what I said earlier. I think it was DJ JR. I think it was DJT JR.
My concern is that you have a vote on every impeachable comment, conduct. That would be all that is happening. So I think if we're going to vote on it, it should be for some of the probably more heinous things that he's done. This remark, these tweets, are offensive, but I think there's many other things that are probably more impeachable. So let's not waste those votes on this perhaps impeachable, but like less impeachable, if there is a spectrum of impeachable offenses.
I'm pretty sure, and Scott seems to know these things better than I do. I don't think you can be impeached for being racist. I'm fairly sure we've had racist presidents before, and they
yes.
I'm not going to name any of them, but I feel like there might be one or two, if I have to guess. I think. Although I guess that it's been disputed as to what he actually said, but I know Birth of a Nation has a quote from Woodrow Wilson in the beginning of it.
Right.
So, you can take from that what you want. But what were you going to say, Scott?
No, I was going to say, it goes back to there really isn't anything that clearly defines what is considered impeachable. So that does give you some more leverage. But in this case, I do agree with you, Chelsea. I think if we are... It becomes like the Republicans voting to repeal Obamacare when President Obama was in office. It's like, okay, are you just going to do this every single time? You're going to have 57 votes every time he should be impeached. I agree that he should have been, they should have had the vote yesterday for considering that this was not appropriate, like censure, and then move on to that. And then let's see what happens with Mueller and his testimony, and then talk about some of the other things that do really potentially go to the threshold of being impeached and having the inquiry. And like I've said all along, it's important, especially to the majority of Democrats are going to be voting to feel passionate that their leadership is going to stand up against this president and not let him get away with things and not just wait for people to vote if there are real issues to be had. Because, yes, I do believe that it would be politicized and turn around and see, look, at the Democrats are just wasting their time voting on impeachment and bringing people for subpoenas and testimonies and not doing the job of what the people have voted them for. But part of what they were voted in for was to put a check on this administration and the president. So there does need to be balance, and I do agree that depending on what happens with the testimony next week, that could give more leverage to allow them to vote for impeachment. But I think it was good what they voted for yesterday, basically admonishing him for his remarks, and now we should probably move on and not impeach him over that.
He specifically spoke about 4 Democratic members of the House, so I think for the House leadership to speak up, you'd like to feel that it would have happened that way if it had been Republicans who were. And speaking of Republicans, there were 4 who voted for it. Will Hurd of Texas, Fred Upton from Michigan, Susan Brooks of Indiana, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. There are only 4. That's why I'm naming all the names.
Well, and Justin Amash now, who's an independent.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But what I also had responded to, one of Trump's tweets again was like, oh look, the Republicans are so unified. I'm like, no, you had 4 cracks. We had 0 that voted against in the Democrats, which again is nice spin. So technically, there were more cracks within the Republican side than there were in the Democrats. They were solid 235 to nothing, which, and definitely outweighs 4 or 5 people that voted from your side for it. So regardless,
imagine that gaggle with reporters, the Democrat that was like, no, I didn't really feel like it was that bad.
Exactly.
It's like,
so that's a big difference, which of course he doesn't tweet about, but the fact was no Democrats crossed over the other side, unlike Republicans. So regardless, yes, it was rather, again, split parties, but there were still several Republicans that did find that, questionable enough to vote, and none for Democrats. So.
And the 4 women that he went against, and we've said their names before, but we'll remind everyone: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley, who, I'm going to be honest, she's not on the same level as the other 3. And it's really Cortez and Omar who are the ones that you see the most. Not that you don't, but look, they're very carefully selected as to why they were called out. But it was interesting. I was like, I had to look, like, wait, who was the other one? Because it didn't stick in my ear. So I think that obviously, like I was saying before, these are ones that have at least very high negatives, maybe with independents, but certainly with Republicans. These are probably amongst the people that if they watch cable news or they listen to talk radio, these are going to be people that they hear a lot about. And I don't know. I think a lot of people agree with the idea that we can have differences of opinion. I don't know much about Ilhan Omar, but I think everything she's ever said about Israel just makes me shake my head. And I'm like, I don't think I like what she's saying, but I don't know her. I don't know that much about her. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, she's kind of an easy punchline because she's young and she's so excited. And, she gave... Tamara always gets mad when I say this. She gave one bad TV interview. Tamara says it wasn't that bad, but I think it was pretty bad. And that kind of has set the tone for her. So I think... I understand what it is, but... I understand picking them. I don't understand saying that they should go back to. So Omar's the one from Somalia, right?
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure I didn't say the wrong one.
Right.
Because to me, I don't know. It's not. I'm not pretending that I don't know. I just wanted to make sure that I was right, that it was her. So. Look, that's an old line. It's like, if you don't like it, get out. I mean, I've heard people running for office have said that. You've certainly heard talk show hosts, radio, television say all sorts of things like that. That
I didn't hear. Well, maybe I wasn't listening for it, but I didn't hear Democrats saying that to Republicans in the Obama years. Did I miss? Somebody?
No, I don't think you heard it. You heard it then, but.
No, it's old, but that's why I said it's tired and boorish, because it is old. And,
it goes much further back than that.
Yes,
yeah.
Which is just his MO. But, the other thing about Omar is that she came over as a teenager. It's not like she came over from Somalia when she was, 25 or something and was an adult. She's come over here. She's grown up here, and she is a naturalized citizen now. So, again, it's just... there were ways that he could have done it without it. But you're absolutely right. He did it because he knew they had high unfavorables with independents, and they're polarizing, and they're the type of figures that are going to get his white base in places like Alabama, and what he's hoping for, in some of the swinging states like Michigan.
Swinger states?
Like Michigan, yeah.
Well, look,
and I'm sure there's a lot of swingers there, and that's
I'm pretty sure Trump's going to lock up the swinger states.
Yes.
If I just had to guess. Not based on anything.
The swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that would be more likely to be like, these are the polarizing figures that to them would represent the Democratic Party. Although they all voted heavily Democrat in 2018 and all have Democratic governors. So I don't know if it's going to work as well as he thinks. They feel that it's, I think, in their opinion, it's too late to now try to be anything else but being the dividing person. Hope they can just eke out another win in the way they did it before. But again, I think a lot of people that on the other side that might have sat out in 2016 are not going to be doing that this time. So it could definitely work against them as well.
Obviously, well, not obviously, but for us here on the panel and for people who aren't Donald Trump Jr., it's very easy to construe the comments as racist. I don't think we're going out on a limb with that. But I wanted to ask you, Chelsea, is by selecting four powerful, outspoken, and they're all relative. None of them has been around for more than a year and a half, unless I'm mistaken.
They're all freshmen.
You're all
right,
freshmen.
They're all freshmen. They're all young.
Right. So they're not
all women.
They're not particularly powerful. That's
yeah.
that's actually what I was going to bring up, though, is that they're all women. So in addition to being racist, is it also sexist? Pointing out, look at these loudmouth women. They should go back to where they came from. The kitchen, not that he actually said that, but just look. Raise your hand if you think that would have been a surprise.
No,
oh, look,
no.
I'm not even gonna give you time to raise your hand.
No,
because they should go back to the countries they came from and in the kitchen in that country.
Right.
So, do you feel that it's also that it just happens to be that these women are the ones with the negatives, or is that also, is he also going for like, all right, we got the white nationalist vote, let's see if we can get the angry white guys who, the incels, the people who hate women, is it calculated on that level too, you think? I
wouldn't put anything past him, although I can't think of, are there any men who are as outspoken progressively? I mean, he definitely didn't say that to Bernie Sanders, go back to where he came from, or even Cory Booker.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, Cory Booker is literally the only person I thought. I guess you could say something to Kamala Harris. I mean, you know what I mean. There's not that many other people.
Well, he already did that with Obama. So I mean, it's like it's not that he wouldn't. So, but of course that was at the presidential level, and everyone else, I mean, are still contenders. But it is interesting that you brought up, because the women thing in general, I wasn't even thinking about that, but it's true. It's not only were they, minorities, but they're women. And if it felt like it was easier to be able to make a comment about them, especially to the base that he's targeting, But it does raise a lot of issues again. Like, and it wasn't really totally a joke, but like Melania Trump, because she's white. Like, my grandmother and most of her siblings came over from Europe during my lifetime, and became U.S. citizens. And you think about that, and so it was enough to I know family members that were not born here that came over here later and contributed to the society. And it's just again going back to this insulting, disparaging comments. Even more so when these women were born here, is just it's just again, it goes back to just being sickened and embarrassed by not only for us but the rest of the world, that we can't claim that we're this great country keeps saying when you're making comments like that, and it's disgusting.
Well, there's a lively conversation going on in the chat.
Do tell.
And it's, someone who represents himself as being British has a lot of opinions. I think things are going very well over there, so it makes sense for you to be looking at the problems in America and telling us what we should be doing right, because there are no problems in the UK. Everything's great. I'm glad that I'm sure you're very happy with the way that Brexit played out, and everybody can move on. Look, you've solved everything over there, so that's great, though. I actually always enjoy this. And our friend R. Scott Brown is there in the chat, and I was telling Chelsea and Scott that he changed his plans when we were on at a different time.
We are honored.
Yes.
So I always appreciate that.
Yes.
Anyway, we welcome all the debate. There's too much to really summarize, but I thought it was very funny. The person who's like, "What? I'm British." Anyway,
I hope that out of this conversation, that we can look to ways to help reconcile sort of the two emerging wings within the Democratic Party. Otherwise, we may have a moment like the Tea Party, where the Tea Party emerged from the Republican Party, had its moment, and then now has kind of died. Is it fair to say that the movement
I think that what the Tea Party was good at was getting candidates into the primaries, and it was the one who ran against Harry Reid. I can't remember her name, but there was Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who had the commercial where she made sure you knew she wasn't a witch. So you had a lot of these figures who I think that they've certainly managed to parlay media careers, but I think that the problem was that those candidates didn't work on a national level. So I think,
well, you still have some of them like Ted Cruz.
Yeah, that's true.
Tea Party. But the reason that I say that is that we should take a lesson from what happened on the other side and reconcile the sort of the two wings. And I see a way to do it. And it is actually, I don't think that either sort of wing, the moderate or the progressive, is liking the corruption very much. And so the focus should be on cleaning up the corruption, which should be cleaning up money in politics. I think that we should actually, on the left, I don't know if I should say the word table, but
yeah.
But let's imagine that we, for a second, put aside Medicare for all and that idea that is being linked with socialism, and just say, why don't we first undo the influence of money on our politics, in our healthcare, and then look back at the laws that we've got, the regulations we have, and roll back the ones that were placed there by these really influential lobbies for pharmaceuticals, hospitals, and the other aspects of healthcare. I don't see why that shouldn't be like the go-to thing, that we all just say, let's go first, clean up the situation. Because let's say we do have Medicare for all. You're going to have Medicare for all on top of a corrupted system. So let's clean that up first. Then let's get people back involved in politics where their voices are as loud as the special interests, because we're going to level out the playing field when you diminish the role of big money in politics, so that then we can hear what Americans really want. Right now, we can't really hear it. And some people are saying, well, we hear that they want, just continuation of what we've got. And some people say we want a Medicare for all. But really, I think we can't really hear people's voices until we quiet down the ones that are too loud. Maybe Taylor Swift can help, with this. I feel like it's a jump from, calm down to like to quiet down the loudness, that the amplification of the role of money in politics. Let's clean that up first. Let's clean up the revolving door between the government and lobbyists. Like Elizabeth Warren, was it yesterday or today, was talking to the nominee for, help me out, he's from Raytheon, Secretary of, can't even remember what cabinet position this is.
Yeah.
And she's asking him, will you keep yourself out of any decisions relating to where you come from? And he said, no, I won't.
No.
You know, so she's like, this is what's wrong with the revolving door. I mean, it happens everywhere where members of, let's say, big agricultural companies will then go into the FDA or the USDA. And so now our water and our food and soil and all of that is dirtied by these industries. So let's clean all that up first.
Yes.
And then let's see.
Well,
what
and I would
emerges.
say that we need to get a consensus on finding a unifying between the two wings of the Democratic Party, too, with that. And instead of like, how progressive can we be? Because I also think we run into the danger of getting moderate, middle-of-the-road voters who might be Republican or independent from going out and voting for the Democratic candidate because they're too afraid we're going to be putting in costly Medicare for all and everything else. But
Let's not do that yet.
But I think everyone is on board, even a lot of Republicans, moderate Republicans, and independents, on cleaning up the system because we see what Trump has done.
Overturn Citizens United. Clean up.
Yes.
I mean, use this last couple of years as like, look at all the ways that this system is corrupt, and we need to go back and fix those so that this doesn't pervade our democracy
and the fact
any longer.
It's sort of a joke that Trump nominates and has people working in those cabinet positions that are the exact opposite of what they should be. You know, they work for big business, they work for big pharma, you know, they work, they lobby,
swamp
right?
Creatures.
They work to almost undermine the system of what they're there to do instead of the other way around. So we should remove those people. We should be able to have people that are scientists and people that have the experience to be able to work in these departments and not to undermine them by, you know.
And then I think that with
lobbyists.
Republicans who are very weary of regulations, I think this gives us an opportunity to go back and clean up some of the regulations and the rules, like the federal government cannot negotiate to get cheaper.
Right, for Medicare.
Right.
That should be a given.
Right. So first, let's clean up before we try and add icing to a shit cake.
Well, on that note, we only have a few minutes, and I did want to get your thoughts on something that I saw earlier this morning. Was the passing of John Paul Stevens at 99, who is a retired Supreme Court justice. I want to ask you first, Chelsea, give me the percentage of how likely it is that President Trump thought that he was about to be able to have a new Supreme Court appointee. 0 to 100, how likely do you think it is that he made a call and was like, all right, let's get our next, well, I was going to say guy or girl in.
What is it,
but let's get our
Elena
next
Kagan
guy.
was the one who went in. Yeah, probably pretty high. But I mean, I hope that in this moment when we remember this justice, that we remember and take to heart his dissents in some pretty big decisions, like Citizens United, in Bush v. Gore, that what he warned us against came true.
Yeah.
And so I hope that Americans pay attention to, at least for a moment, what this man did, what he said, and then take to heart, you know, did he have a point, and maybe should we, you know, come up with policy that corrects some of what he thought would happen and that turned out to be true.
Well, and also sort of the last lineage of picking Supreme Court justices where it wasn't politicized, where he was picked by President Ford in right after Watergate, like 1975, and he became one of the most reliable liberal type votes on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I was surprised that Nixon was the one who made him a federal judge in the
He
first
made him
place.
a federal judge in the first place, exactly, and then Ford elevated him. And so it was one of those things where we've talked about, too, in the past, where a lot of these Supreme Court justices that are appointed by one political party end up being more moderate or the opposite of what the presidents or the political parties in power at the time thought. But here was a real pure jurist that they really don't make in that mold anymore because these judges have become so much more politicized over the years. As we've seen, it's become so much more extreme, and here was someone who really took his job seriously, and really deliberated seriously too. And it's kind of not only a passing of him, but of an era of where we had judges that were not politicized and where you could feel that you had faith and trust in the Supreme Court, where you don't necessarily feel that anymore because of the way it's become so political. And it's sad because that's kind of a passing of an era now, because that was really someone, I mean, you know, that you saw that was picked by the opposite party, who was, you know, that either had that is now retired but has now passed away.
And I find it interesting that obviously, like you're saying, his personal beliefs, obviously that's going to factor into some extent when you consider a decision. But I was reading that last year he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times where he was calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. So I don't feel like I guess not legislated, but I felt like that wasn't really something that was on his agenda. And I think that a lot of the Supreme Court justices, some of them maybe unfairly, get characterized as though they're up there with a specific agenda. If that's something he felt strongly about, I don't think, and I would have to read through a lot of decisions, that was something that he was actively working towards. So I just think it's interesting that he had that belief, but obviously we're no closer to that than when he was still in the court.
Well, and he retired almost a decade ago.
Sure.
But he also was very big on abortion rights and keeping that legal as well. And again, appointed by, and of course, at the time, if we were looking at it, like Ford and really Nixon to some degree would be Democrats in today's world. Ford was just very moderate and came from a very moderate.
LBJ would probably be a Republican. So
came from the sort of Rockefeller Republican. Yeah. So, you know, Nelson Rockefeller was his VP, but you know, came from a very moderate, where you know at the time like New England and everything was that was where the moderate Republican power base was. But it's still interesting to see that and see that we had someone that was beyond political. So. You know, that was sad to see that passing. But I also want to say the breaking news is that they decided not to move forward with the impeachment vote in the House today, and 195 Democrats tabled that as well. So
the vote was to not actually vote, basically.
Yeah, to table it, and essentially, like we talked about, which is better. We already did the censure, we at least not censure, but had already said this was wrong.
You've made a statement.
You've made a statement. Now
condemned it.
Let's save impeachment for the bigger things that are to come. So I think that was a smart decision on the Democrats' side. And we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for
contempt votes.
For staying plugged in. We are about to be unplugged. Thank you. But we will be back next week, as I mentioned at the top of the show. We'll be back Wednesday at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern. In theory, Mueller's going to talk that day, but then the week after will be the debate. So we'll give you those particulars next week. But thank you to everyone who joined us in the chat, wherever they were visiting from, whatever pond they crossed to be there. But in the meantime, Scott, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at SMan80. That's SMan80.
And Chelsea?
At Chelsea Galicia.
And you can find me at Christian DMZ. Thanks so much to everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.